this movie who enjoyed it. And that's a very important part of what movies do for us as well. Fern, go ahead.
It had this, I grew up in LA during my teen years, and even the things that were totally insensitive felt like totally what was going on. It felt like a wonderful portrayal of various horrible places in LA. And there's even a certain nostalgia for the horrible places. And it felt like these, like Ferris Bueller and the John Hughes movies that I would sit and watch with my kids. And I just, but in the middle of all of it, of all this portrayal, there was also the female lead, and Alana, and she was a person, and she grew, and so it wasn't just this John Hughes silly movie about LA. It was also about her dealing with growing up and meeting people who were less substantial than she. And I loved the movie.
Okay, you're allowed to love it. You're allowed to love it.
It was all over the place, but it touched me.
It's allowed. And when a movie touches you, all you have to do is look at why and feel good about it. And say, I get that. That was true for me in my life. In watching it this afternoon, as recently as 5 minutes ago, I realized this film is about the corruption of people and the falseness of Los Angeles. And now, let me back up. This film didn't intend to be about it. This film was intended by Paul Thomas Anderson to be a love letter to the Los Angeles he grew up in. His father was from Cleveland. I knew his father when I was a kid because his father was on the TV. His name was Goulardi, and he hosted a cheap, freebie Saturday or Sunday afternoon show of horror movies. He dressed up in black like a vampire, and that's what his father did for a living. His father also was possessed of a great bass voice. And when his father moved the family to LA to make it big, Ernie Anderson, the father, became the most in-demand voiceover artist for Hollywood movie trailers. And he made millions of dollars. I mean, many millions of dollars over a decade or more. This is the life that Paul Thomas Anderson grew up in. It was LA. It was in the 70s. I think he was born in 1970 or 71. So it was the late 70s. But this film, as you know, takes place in 1973 with the first oil embargo. Remember at the end of the film, she says, do you even know what that is to Gary? And that's a clue, how clueless they all were. So I think this is, I'll give you my take on the movie, and you're allowed to like it, even though I'm going to tear it apart. This movie was like 6 films in search of a plot. There were so many different things going on. That may have corresponded to the LA of the 70s, Fern, and it's fine. But I think it had no discipline, had no purpose that they could identify. They just thought of stuff as they went, and they slapped it together, and it was held together by the glue that was the 1970s LA. The genre, the ambience, or shall I say, the lack of character. I moved to LA in 1970, and I lived in Hollywood, right next to the 101 freeway. So it was a skip and a jump to get to Ventura Boulevard. And unfortunately, I spent a long time being frustrated on Ventura Boulevard because I didn't find any there. I made, of course, I didn't find any there on the other side of the hill either for different reasons. But I thought the Valley was a total bourgeois, middle class, lost, flippant, insignificant, and boring milieu. And
it was.
Thank you. Please, Hannah, please mute everybody so I can rant, and then I can have a civil discussion with everybody else. And I found this movie to be the same: boring, irrelevant, plotless, aimless, and without a purpose, and floating in its ability just to exist, just like the middle-class Jews of the Valley. Excuse me if anybody is or was, or anybody who's not Jewish. I don't mean to be a Jew basher in this, but it was an empty time. It was the defeat of the 1960s, when all the dreams and goodwill and self-sacrifice of young students in the 60s who went to jail for protesting the draft, for protesting the war, for participating in the civil rights movement, who went to the South in the 60s and died. Jewish guys who went to the South and died because they were trying to enlist Black people to vote. This is the legacy of the 60s gone awash and astray in waterbeds. And maybe, there's one scene where she's smoking grass with her sister. And John Peters is another symbol of the 70s excesses, dressed all in white, and a totally raving asshole, who gets his comeuppance in the end. He's even still raving around the town the next morning and throws a trash can in a window. I mean, John Peters did like his cocaine, it's true. And Barbra Streisand he was her boy toy, I guess, for a while. But this is a very rough, coarse picture of the 70s. It's not redemptive for me. I'm this Cleveland East Coast guy who came to LA in 1970, who felt, oh my God, what did I get myself into going to graduate school here? I didn't understand it. It took me several years to embrace it. Steve Greenberg is laughing because we went to college together. And I think he had some of the same impressions because we went to USC together. And it took me several years to forgive LA for what it could never be.
Excuse me, did you say you went to SC and you were upset with the bourgeois atmosphere?
USC was worse. USC was
clarify this.
USC was upper class at the time.
As a UCLA grad, I just checking it.
University of Spoiled Children.
Anna, please mute everybody. Okay, so I used to say USC was where people from Pasadena sent their blonde daughters to go to find a husband and vote just like them when they grew up. I heard of, I'll tell you two stories. We can have some fun with this because what's to discuss about the movie? There's plenty. Two things. I heard through the grapevine that somebody's English professor said Shakespeare was a communist because he didn't say what he meant. This is an English professor. And the other funny story from SC was my girlfriend, whom I came to California with, who became a graduate student in psychology, experimental, not the clinical kind, and got involved with all kinds of really awful people, faculty members in her department, one of whom had a Porsche in 1971, and the license plate was PhD on it. I rest my case. So I'm a bigot, I'm biased, and that's okay. You can hate me because I'm bashing LA and all these stereotypes that we're actually living in LA and that the film accurately portrays. So it's like, that's not my point about the movie. My point is, and I didn't see this the first time I saw it, this is a love story, a very improbable love story. First, she may be 25, but she looks like she's 18 to his 15, right? It's like, you can't tell me this is a sophisticated Valley girl just because she doubts his comeuppance, his bravado. And the whole thing is like preposterous. Sean Penn is preposterous as an alcoholic ex-movie star and his sidekick, and they stage this stunt on the golf course outside the tail of the cock. And he proves he's seducing her with a smooth move that he's well practiced. And she's smitten for him. And he takes off and she falls off the back of the bike. And then she realizes, oh my God, it's really Gary Valentine for me. And then she gives up on Gary and she goes after Joe Wax, who turns out to be gay and closeted and only calls her because he wants her to take his boyfriend home as a beard for him to imply that she and the boyfriend are going home together. This is out and out moral corruption and the deception of one person for another. I just was livid when I was watching it. And I was most livid at Paul Thomas Anderson because this guy just pasted many different things together. I think he didn't even care. He just wanted to make another movie. A producer friend actually wrote most of the screenplay for it. And it was based on personal anecdotes of these two guys because Thomas Anderson was, he was like 10 years old or less when this took place, but he felt the vibe. So I think this is like a trick played on audiences by smug Hollywoodites. And excuse me, I don't believe in intellectual elitists because I think they're great, especially those of us who are in the group. And thank God we exist in this country or it would really go down the tubes. as a foil for the nonsense that goes on among the anti-vaxxers and QAnon. But the point is, I'm kind of pissed off, as you can tell, that this film was made and credited and lauded by intelligent people when they don't realize how, without knowing it, it's a condemnation of Los Angeles and the shallow life of the 1970s here. Susie, I'm glad you're still smiling. Maybe we'll talk sometime. So I'm tearing into it because of that, but I want us to look at two things. One, does it really peel back the layers of shallowness and insincerity that is part of the cottage industry that is Hollywood, which lives on impressions and notoriety? That's the first thing I want to talk about. And the second is these two scenes with the restaurateur and his two different wives and the social stigma on the web that this has created. I want to give a little background for that, and I promise not to go on and on so much. I'm just really steamed under the collar about this. So Jen Yamato on Thursday wrote this article about the backlash. And John Michael Higgins is the actor. He looks like others, but he's his own person, playing Jerry Frick, the Japanese restaurant owner. And the accusation is from the woke, I don't want to say the woke left, because some of the woke left are. And that's a good thing. It's just when they take it to extremes. But Asian American women and their advocates rightfully, got the hairs turned up on their back and said, wait a second, this is wrong. What did they think was wrong? And this is how extreme some of the criticism can go, not just of Biden or Trump or Manchin or Kevin McCarthy, whether they give it or they take it. The writer says, two of the only non-white characters in the film who are robbed of agency and are themselves stereotypes that play into anti-Asian tropes. Well, Paul Thomas Anderson's defense was, hey, I was pointing out the guy's racism and his condescension to these Asian women. I wasn't saying it was a good thing. But people took it the wrong way, saying, oh, but you diminished the role of the women. Well, one, they didn't see the movie right. And I'll go over that in a second. And two, wait a second, if you have a villain, there has to be a victim, right? Otherwise, there's no damage that the villain has done. So if you want to criticize him, you can't say, oh, the two women weren't whole personalities that dominated the film and we didn't understand their backstories. That's part of the cruelty. He dehumanized them. Yes. So I'm sorry, that happens. And it is pointed out, and I think, Fern, you said that this attitude or attitudes like it was very common in the 70s. We were racially insensitive. Even the woke Jewish population of the Valley and the non-Jewish population. It was like they were still darker skinned. Rodney King riots hadn't happened. There was, we didn't notice the slights that we inadvertently made to other people. And I totally buy into that. I totally buy into systemic racism and critical race theory. I'm not saying that these things aren't valid, but the backlash that comes in these times, really, it tends to miss the point. People react to the details and not the bigger picture, which I think is egregious enough. Let me just read a few more complaints about the movie from this article, and we'll start with the movie and then we can end up with this. Paul Thomas Anderson had a very weak defense for this. He said, I'm not sure what the problem that people have with this is. The problem is that he was an idiot saying stupid things. No, he's being naive. Higgins suggested that, people liked it because they got to participate in racism innocently. Well, maybe that's a point. Maybe we like ridicule. Maybe we tolerate ridicule more than we should because we can blame somebody else for it while chuckling at it on our own. I think that's a valid point. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be in the movie. But there's another comment that really disturbs me. He says, I guess I'm not sure how to separate what my intentions were from how they landed. Well, that's a big deal. And as when I teach, I talk about you have to distinguish between your intent and the audience's perception. They are two different things. And in today's world, we know that how things are perceived are very different from how they're projected, how they're intended to be perceived. And not to understand that is not to understand how virulently divided we are, how people are so willing to believe that that other person's a liar, or it's fake news, or there's no substance to it. All nuance has been destroyed from our lives. I shouldn't say all nuance, that's a generalization like the other people would make, but I'm a nice, moderate, liberal guy in the liberal sense of the word. And it's like there's no room for nuance and keeping, and I said this before, especially in Torah study, you have to keep two conflicting ideas in your head at the same time and not explode and not regress, not dig into some fake news or some ancient idea, whether it's the originalist theory of the Constitution or fundamentalist Judaism or anything extreme like that, that takes cover in a lack of nuance. Let me read a few more things. The Asian community has said, we're fed up with this because it's as if we were invisible and our voices don't matter. Well, they weren't I think everybody in LA is the subject of this film because it's all about moral deception between people. Gary Valentine may be the sweetest person in the room because he's so crazy sincere in his 15-year-old naive innocence. This kid means everything. And she's close enough in age to notice him, but she doesn't believe him either. And she's 10 years older. So they'd have us believe. Going on, let's talk about the first scene with the first wife.
Jim, before you do that, I think that some people need to be able to respond.
Fair enough. Let's go with Steve
start
first.
with Steve and then Susie.
I want to say you can't approach every movie as if it's highbrow, PC, telling a lesson. It's there for entertainment. Maybe it makes you think, maybe it doesn't. It can be enjoyable. And as for some of the issues with the Asians, people can laugh at a step and fetch it joke who are not at all racist. And it's there, it's presented, it's clearly could have happened, it clearly could be realistic, and it in the context in which you're portraying a society that existed, people have to stop being hypersensitive.
Right, you're right.
Look at things for what they're worth, what they communicate, and if it's an enjoyable movie and it portrays something, you don't have to expect it to teach the lessons you want. Every movie isn't there to teach a lesson and show you how everything ought to be.
Steve, would you have felt the same way if it had been a portrayal of a religious Jew with payas and a heavy accent, and they were just joking? Would you just be able to say, it's just a joke?
If it were the proper scene, absolutely. I think it depends on what it is. If they're talking about ovens and other things, maybe not. But I can definitely, if they talk about their dress, and I actually believe I could. I think it depends on the nature and what they're doing, how realistic it is, and everything else.
Okay, but Steve, one thing I'm asking all of us to do tonight is to say, can we imagine how someone might take offense at this? It's wrong. It's not the filmmaker's intention, but it's a way of understanding the sensitivities that we live with every day.
And that's a problem. If everybody gets upset at everything that anyone says that rubs them slightly the wrong way, it goes back to the PC of the 80s.
Yes.
And if that's how you're reacting, then I have a serious problem with that. Yeah, I can see it, and I think they need a realignment, because that's not, to me, that's not an appropriate way to view things. And people at a certain point have free speech rights, and people shouldn't be so thin-skinned and upset by everything they don't like.
Okay, well, that we can go off on the failure of our public education system.
Well, that's at the root of a lot of the things.
Right.
Now,
We
I
haven't taught
agree.
people for 30 years or 40 years since Reagan and who cut the educational budgets. We haven't taught public school students how to think critically, how to think for themselves.
Right.
And that's, and this PC policy has crept in, to a ridiculous degree. I can remember maybe in the 90s or the aughts, some fifth grader was expelled or suspended because he kissed, kindergartner was suspended because he kissed a girl and didn't ask permission. It's like, it's ridiculous. It's anecdotal, I acknowledge, but that's one of the extremes that we have gone to. And it's ratcheted up into the upper echelons of society and politics. It's terrible because it obscures other issues. Like Joe Manchin is a millionaire many times over because he has a coal trust and he sells coal for a living, and his son runs the business now, and he's, voting against all of Biden's air pollution funding that he tried to build into the budget. It's like we miss the bigger picture at great cost to ourselves. Hitler can call attention to the terrible inflation everyday Christian Germans had. But it was really easy to say the Jews are at fault because they run the banking system. Or today, the Jews run the media, or somebody runs the media, the elitists.
But all of which isn't true.
I know but the point is it's easy to say because it's a retreat into a very safe, narrow, irrefutable fallacy, because it is just that. It's a dream.
I want to give
Somebody else?
Susie a chance. Susie,
Yeah,
unmute
Susie.
yourself.
Susie, let me have it. I'm glad you had a good time. You're
Susie,
muted,
you're
Susie.
still muted. That's good.
Well, I don't know where to start. So I'll just start by saying the movie just tickled my funny bone from the beginning to the end. It was so, it was so disjointed, but somehow it was fun to put the pieces together. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought that we didn't have to go really deep into anything. I wish I had the chutzpah that kid had, one speck of it, to be able to go after school to the office and get on the phones and start selling things. I would have been really good at that, but I would have been terrified of the principal coming down on my back. But I agree a lot with what you said, Steve. Taking this movie and picking it apart because it could be hurting somebody's feelings. If it was a Jewish rabbi that was being joked about or whatever, I would look at it in a humorous way because there's humor in everything. And I really liked the movie. I just thought they all did a good job. And I'm not a shallow person. We watched so many deep movies, so many heavy movies. This was a treat. I really liked it.
Well, if it's an antidote to all the serious films I programmed for us, you're welcome.
Thank you. I liked it.
I thought it would be a bit of a relief for some people. I thought we'd be kind of split on those who enjoyed it and those who were like not moved
And
by it.
the way that nobody was made up, you could see the pimples on their faces and the freckles and their hair wasn't perfect and blah, 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 blah. It was real. I remember the 70s really well.
Okay, did any of those characters ring true to you? They did to me,
Yes,
but
they did.
all right. So let's hear from some.
Steve Greenberg,
Well,
Greenberg would like to.
After Steve, I'd like to hear from people who actually enjoyed the movie and tell us why. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. The technology still baffles me. Francois Truffaut did a film called Day for Night about behind the scenes of filmmaking. It was a great feature film. And because it was about making a feature film, the crew members were involved in making the film. They were in the film itself. And at the very beginning, a fictional interviewer, a documentarian is interviewing the various people involved, and each one of them, the caterer says, well, this is a movie about a caterer who works for a film production company, or a carpenter says it's about a carpenter who works for the crew on a film production company. The scenes with the Japanese restaurant owner and his two wives, if you think about the total length of this vastly overlong movie, in my opinion, and how much of that length was devoted to that restaurateur, to react to that is like saying it's a movie about a carpenter. It isn't about that at all. It's just an incidental thing that might have struck some people as bad taste, but it's ridiculous to focus everything on that particular aspect of this movie. I also want to say one other thing. Jim, I think you should program more movies you detest, because I've never seen you better, and I'm a fan of yours, but you've never been better in my experience, and you have been tonight. So please keep doing the same thing.
Oh, that's because I tried to behave in all the other sessions, but this one really got under my skin. Well, Steve, let me play devil's advocate with you. Some people are too sensitive to certain things, especially if they feel they have been wrong. It's like you think of any of the very conservative red state people who are just rural, simple people. They're farmers, or they're community members who live in small towns, and they don't understand Black men in dreadlocks, or gay marriage, or any number of other contemporary issues that urban dwellers take for granted as normal and part of the life we all live together. We, as progressive, sensitive people, I'm saying you have to use your imagination with the criticism that's leveled against this film, and realize how even these two minuscule scenes pricked their sore spots. They live with this assault. We don't. We're white. We can pass. I'd like to turn Risa, if you don't mind me calling attention to you. And how does Israeli cinema deal with the Orthodox? There is a comedy series in Israel now called The New Black or something, about, 6 handsome guys with payas and black suits and white shirts, riding in a convertible. That's how they advertise it. And Jewish Israeli comedy is also very insensitive sometimes. So can you relate?
That movie, I think, is terrible. I've watched part of that. They're billing it on Netflix as if it's a big hit in Israel. I doubt that it is a big hit in Israel, but I think it's a horrible show. But there are other shows in Israel that show the good side of Orthodoxy, or show the interesting side, and those are the things that we see. The fauda and that kind of thing. Yeah, they're very well done. They're very well done. I missed the beginning of this. I was out on the beach with my son and his dog.
How terrible!
Yeah, terrible. But anyway, I don't know what people have said about this movie. I hated it.
Love it. The critics. Well,
I don't care about the critics. You know what? After I saw it, and I was ready to turn it off. If it weren't for tonight, I would have turned it off. I was beside myself halfway through that this was a boring teenage kind of a movie. I didn't like it at all. However, when I went to look at Rotten Tomatoes, it was interesting because it sets it up as very well received by the critics, and it had like a 63% from viewers. So there were 2 lines like that, and little stuff in between. And I thought that's exactly right. Technically, it might have been marvelous, or they were happy with what the director did, or whatever it was. I just thought it was I really didn't enjoy it from the beginning to the end. I was bored out of my mind.
So what I'm trying to get at, why do some people really like it?
This movie?
Yes.
I don't know why. I don't know why anybody would like it unless they were a teenager of some kind.
Well, I
didn't like it.
Listen to Fern.
A long time ago.
I was a teenager too, but
well, I know this world. It's very familiar. I get it. I remember it.
Me
It
too.
existed,
Yeah, but this is
and it was
a
well
very
portrayed.
This is a very special, bad world.
This is the world that I lived in. It's LA.
Well,
It was
it's LA.
peripheral LA, where Hollywood infects everybody who's only peripherally involved in it. These aren't movie stars. They're people who have some little piddly job, and LA and the Valley in particular was just filled with these people and that kind of feeling. And I think it very well portrayed what it felt like.
Good.
I found it entertaining.
I'm glad.
But I do want to say that for the issue of making fun and not taking offense, women have been told for as long as I can remember, it's just a joke, honey. It's just a joke. Lighten up. And, Jews have been told the same thing. We're just joking. It's just a joke.
I know.
This clearly was just a joke. It
The
was,
whole movie?
no, the scene
the
with
Asian women.
with the Asian women, it was clearly not just a joke. It was also saying that this guy, Fred, whatever his name was a loser and another loser because he was such a bigot, such a racist. But it does, as the person who's in minority and being discriminated against, it feels bad. And it doesn't feel good to be told it's just a joke. You just want to say, let's stop. Barbara, do you want to unmute yourself and comment?
I think there are two parts. If we're looking at that scene as if you're looking at it critically, it's making fun of it. And so it depends upon where, I thought it was obnoxious and disgusting, but didn't the film show that it was obnoxious and disgusting?
Yes.
It wasn't supporting his behavior. It was making him look like an ass.
Right.
Dealing with, so it's a funny juxtaposition because I think it's awful what that kind of behavior is, but I didn't like the film, but I think the criticism about this is weird because I did think he looked like a buffoon and the women looked badly treated, and I think there was sympathy for that. So I'm not sure why that LA Times article has the power. I don't understand because I don't think it was supporting it.
The article was merely to summarize the opposition, not to advocate one way or another.
But what were they? He wasn't a hero. He was a jerk.
It's a huge hullabaloo right now.
That's not the point. The people who objected were saying you dehumanize the two women,
But he did. I think the question. It seemed like the film accurately portrayed this asshole dehumanizing the two women he was married to and made him look stupid. So I'm not sure I understand exactly. Well, I think it supports people not behaving like that. It didn't look very appealing.
If the women had been in the other room and you hadn't seen them as characters, you'd still get the same feeling from him if he was calling to them in his fake Japanese accent. But this is the point, that people seize upon a little detail. We've even seen this, in our own beloved discussion group here. Well, they say, well, why didn't he do this? It lost me for the rest of the film. Or, J. Edgar Hoover didn't call the Desi Arnaz, so the whole movie's bad for me. It's like, no, that's not the point. The film did have a function in the film. It wasn't great. It's basically the PR business of his mother. But I want to point out, in defense of the first Japanese wife, when Gary's mother reads the PR she's written, she ends it with a summary of the cute, adorable women dressed up in traditional Japanese garb. And there's a shot from the side of the first wife, and her expression changes. And then they have an exchange. And there's a negotiation that takes place. And that paragraph is removed, and it talks about the cuisine instead. This woman didn't allow that appropriation of her traditional dress. She did take action. She did control her husband at the time. And she made a contribution. Her will was followed through, and everybody agreed it was for the better. Of course, Gary's mother would have said yes to anything. But
I just want to say one more thing. I'm not going to sleep well tonight because I agree with Jim tonight, not Fern. This is really complicated.
Oh my God. Well, Barbara, this is a lesson. You have to learn how to hold two conflicting opinions in your head at the same time.
This is a very interesting experience. Thank you very much.
Lisa.
No, I didn't even think they were wives. I thought it was all a setup because he didn't speak Japanese and they spoke only Japanese. I thought the whole thing was a setup that he paid them or whatever it was. And I don't understand at all what the Jewish aspect was. Now I know it's the actress's real family and all that, but what was that Shabbat dinner all about? Why was it in the movie? Why was the whole Jewish thing in the movie?
It wasn't even Gary. It was Gary's competitor for her attention.
Right, for her
It was
attention.
in the movie, Risa, because Alana Haim's family is
I know it.
Israeli. That's why it got in the movie.
That's not reason enough.
Yes,
It
What-
that
was
doesn't
another
even make
little
sense.
story of
Yeah.
LA. The valley is filled with Israelis and was filled with it. Natalie, chime in.
Terrible.
Go ahead, Natalie.
Natalie, unmute.
Unmute. Lower left corner. You can do it.
Now,
No,
still
not
muted.
yet. Go to the microphone in the lower left corner and click on it. Okay. Natalie, we can't
Natalie,
hear
want-
you.
Natalie? Stop for a second, Natalie.
There, it went off. It went off.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, put your
Uh,
picture back on.
Okay, sorry. This is just not.
Put the camera
Start the
on.
video.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
get with us.
I didn't live in Los Angeles. I'm from New York. I feel a lot like Jim in terms of living in New York City and then moving out here for many years. I've been here. I had those same feelings. But I think to me, what happened in the Jewish scene was an indication of how the new Jew, the young Jew, which is her boyfriend, who is Jewish, is now starting, this you're talking about this period of time, to feel very proud to say, I don't believe in any of this. And he has the nerve to say it at this house where these people really care. So this is a point of where the society already is starting to change, where young people feel free to say whatever they like and not care if they're hurting people's feelings. So when she runs out of the house with him and slams him back with, have you had a circumcision? Whether you like it or not, you're a Jew, whether you want to get rid of this or not. I thought that was important in the movie. And to me, I agree with Risa that this whole thing that we've spent so much time talking about the Asian situation, that was just for a few seconds of the movie.
Yeah.
I don't know why. This to me is just another example of prejudice and small thinking that was at that time in the valley here, which I don't know anything about really. So that's
Look,
all I have to
that guy
say.
was a punk. I forget his name, Lance, I think. And
So
that's what some smug 16-year-old kid who like didn't know anything of the world would say. Yes, it
Right.
was insensitive, but you can't tell me that Alana's Jewishness or the father being Israeli and making the girls all study Krav Maga. I am surprised at that pronunciation. I always said Krav Maga. Had anything to do with the plot, had any agency, had showed up as having any effect on anything that followed it.
What plot?
What plot? Okay, point well taken, Fern, but that's my point. There's no continuous drama. There's nothing to follow unless you see that this is Alana's, what she is gleaning from the men she chooses, right? They disappoint her one after the other, except Gary is eternal. Maybe because he is the youngest and he's so persistent. When he shows up with the white tie and the white jacket, it's like, oh my God, where's the disco ball? It's like she sees past all that. She just sees some guy who swears he's mad about her, and he ultimately breaks through. And all the other men betray her. Joel Wax, Sean Penn, the aide to Joel Wax. They almost kiss in the silhouette there before she goes to the dinner with Joel Wax. And It's like she's looking, she's searching, she has dalliances. Nobody does it. Nobody does it for her. So it's her coming of age too. I just think it's all like a romp. It's sort of like a Peter Bogdanovich movie without the budget, like At Long Last Love, or one of those romps. It's like it's amusing, and if you like it, great. We're supposed to have fun and be distracted at movies, but I'm all for relevance. Do something that's less scattered. This just seemed to me to be an arrogant act of Hollywood largesse. Of he could get the budget together because he's Paul Thomas Anderson, and he did it.
It is, by the way, a very in movie. There were a lot of in jokes. You needed to know the business in some way to catch a lot of it.
Well, like the woman agent who smokes a cigarette and says, "You have a very Jewish nose." That's in demand. There are these caricatures that you could call them, they're a hoot, but they go nowhere. They're anecdotal. And you have to, a drama is about linking characters together and showing causation across many scenes that takes us to a climax. And there's no one thread through this other than Gary chasing Alana.
I'm going to call on Bob Boucher. Is it Boucher or Boucher?
It's Boucher.
Boucher. Are you called Bob?
No.
Okay, Robert.
Not for the last 45 years.
Okay, I won't change it. Robert.
So what you're bringing up, Jim, is the question that you had put in the email we were going to discuss, because to me, it's the most interesting thing about this movie. Why did it get so much attention? Why did it get all those Academy Award nominations?
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I've thought about it. And the only thing I can think about is I can understand why blacks have so much trouble with Hollywood. That they haven't gotten anywhere most of the time, more recently, because they're not like the majority of the people in the Academy. Thomas, on the other hand, is. I think he's one of them. He's liked. I think because he made the movies. The only reason I can think of. I can't think that anybody in the Academy that just saw this movie for what it was would think that it's this great movie.
Well, his films have not been that critically successful. You may have seen Phantom Threads, which was a total mystery, but gorgeous, about an English high fashion tailor who made.
Yeah, I like his earlier movies a lot.
Yeah, but nothing's really taken off, but he does have a certain cachet behind him.
Yeah, I think he's a great filmmaker. I think the directing in this movie is really good. But what
do you mean by that? Do you mean
the lack of a plot?
Do you mean the performances?
The performances
when you say great
are good. Alana's very good, but that does not make a best movie.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
The director is very much a part, central to the formation of the plot and the overall feel of the movie from the inception of the script. And you have to say, the blame has to fall with him. And he may say, "Oh, we were just having fun. What's wrong with a fun movie?" And the answer is there's nothing wrong with a fun movie. But to get best written and best picture nominations, total mystery to me.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, I think that's exactly, what I was saying. It's a very in joke movie. The many cameos of people, you had to know who Bill Holden was. It was Jack Holden, and all of these kind of in jokes that clearly you needed to know that to catch a whole bunch of things in the movie.
That's what I'm saying when I go back to the thing about blacks. It's about their people.
Yeah, Hispanics too, who are underrepresented. And it's not just because they're underrepresented in the executive branch. It's because they weren't an economic force for selling tickets until recently. And that's when the studios began to chase, starting with Spike Lee's movies that actually made some money. And there were many others. And now it doesn't have to be a black movie that's made by a black. Judy, please stop it.
I asked her to unmute. Judy, it's impossible. You got to deal with your computer. If you want to call me during the week, we'll try and work on it. But every time you unmute, people can't hear anything.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say a quick something. I was bored to death. And I kept trying to find something that it was about. But as you said, Jim, for me, it was so scattered. Visually, there were some things I found interesting, and I liked Alana in terms of who she was and her performance. But it was so long.
It was.
And I kept thinking, when is this going to be over?
Well, like, I don't know if you saw Drive My Car, which was 3 hours. And there were times when you said, it's feeling a little long, but you also said, I want to see where this is going. And you didn't feel that with this film. It just went somewhere. It was arbitrary. And that's not what filmmakers do. They should have a goal in sight, not just to have fun because they know how to shoot a film, but they should tell a story that means something to the people who see it. And having a good time, you can watch Dave Chappelle's Comedy Hour if you want and have a good time. I'm a bit of an orthodox film idealist. I admit that. Although when I was growing up, I loved action movies and fun stuff. And, to this day, I love a good silly comedy. But at some point, you just have to say, what are we doing making stuff like this? It's not a good example to young filmmakers who don't know the in-jokes, who don't know the Valley.
Interesting.
It's a different world. And look, the 70s were the 70s, but frankly, I think it was a disgrace, having lived through them as a young man trying to find himself, at USC Film School in the 70s. It was horrible because nobody was sensitive. Nobody cared. It was all about box office grosses, and there were some great films like Stanley Kramer made a bunch of really great socially conscious films. And then he makes Bless the Beasts and Children. And it's like this total stinker. Hollywood was aging and changing, and it still is. And I welcome all the changes, but this glibness, this film, let's make a film because we can, has got to stop, or it never will. Because we're talking about ego and money and power and clout. So
Howard would like to make a comment. Judy, if you want to, is Judy still here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the echo. I don't know what the problem is, but well, I've had my hand up for like 10 minutes.
Judy. Go on mute and I'm going to talk for a second. Judy,
thank you.
Every
Okay, Howard.
time we unmute you, it's the echo is deafening. That's why it's happening. Put your comment in the chat and we'll read it for you. And during the week, if you'd like to call either me or Jim or Hannah, we'll try and figure out the problem with your computer. Okay. Howard, go ahead. And then Mona.
I don't know if this is of any interest to anyone, but just before this conversation started, I went to the internet to look up the tail of a cock because to refresh my memory about that. Yeah. And I found out there's a very amazing website, something like Old LA Restaurants, and it has a lot of information about Will Wright's ice cream and Hamburger Hamlet and Rich Lors and stuff like that, and Piece of Pizza. If you grew up in LA, I grew up, I guess, in the 50s and 60s, 50s actually. But anyhow,
you're still growing up, Howard.
There's still hope, but it's really interesting. All those those old restaurants, and most of the Brown Derby that don't exist anymore.
Sure, and
as far as the movies, as far as the movie's concerned, I thought the only interesting part of the movie was the part about the two Japanese wives. The rest of it, I just
well. Any one of these themes, the Joel Wax story, the Holden story, they could have been a movie unto themselves if parsed properly and investigated. But they weren't. They were just trying to get it.
Never seen anything like the Japanese wives, and I still haven't figured it out because they say that in the end he says they don't understand. He doesn't understand Japanese, but before that it seemed as though he did understand Japanese, and the women actually had a lot of agency. They were telling him what to do.
Yeah,
it was
he may not have been able to speak it, but he understood it, and they understood English.
Yeah,
I think Barbara.
Mona, and then Barbara.
I enjoyed the movie. I thought the performances.
All right, Mona.
were very natural. I liked the fact that not everyone was pretty or beautiful, and that they gave very authentic feeling performances, and the valley looked so real. We only moved here in 77, and I didn't go into the valley that often, but I was on the rare occasions when I was there, I had this sense of ugliness and oppression. So, I saw this, I thought, oh, I remember that. And there was a kind of, there's a quality of a running joke throughout the movie that I found very appealing. Here is this crazy kid who's so full of confidence, who hasn't been ruined like all the other child actors. I thought there was actually a lot of very, very apt commentary on what it's like to be a child actor. That was certainly very sharp and very accurate. The woman who was leading that troupe of kid actors was a real bitch. She was just a horrible, horrible person. But our hero, he doesn't let anything get him down. He's always up for the next challenge. He's kind of a picaresque hero. He goes from one episode to another, and he's wandering around, and for some reason he's absolutely mad about the most immature 25 or 27 or 28-year-old woman I've ever seen. But then again, when we see her in the context of her family with her sisters, and she's convinced everybody's judging her and criticizing her, and she can't compete with the oldest sister. I mean, there were certain things that were very real. So I thought the Shabbat dinner actually was very essential to showing you that whatever insecurities and inadequacies, I'm sorry, I can't remember what Alana Haim's character's name was.
Lana. It is Alana.
Okay. Ilana, right.
Alana.
Whatever her insecurities and problems with her family were, family was extremely important to her. She might have acted as if it wasn't important, but having this interaction with Lance, who was, I think he was wonderful as this spoiled, entitled young actor. I mean, he just nailed it. And when and incidentally, Natalie, you mentioned only a 16-year-old could mouth off in that way. I have an ex-brother-in-law who was perfectly capable of mouthing off in a way like that when he was 30. It takes all kinds. So I just appreciated the love. I thought he loved his main characters. He just loved them to pieces, and he watched them do all of these ridiculous, silly things. And when the kid gets taken away by the police, and she is rushing to help him, you could feel underneath all of her cynicism and satire and her language that puts everything down, she did love that kid. She wasn't going to see him hauled away. So I thought there was a tremendous amount of love in the movie and a willingness to let people look like what they look like, as Susie said, pimples and all. And there was a kind of freedom in the lack of adherence to a well-developed storyline. It was picaresque in structure,
Okay.
Just going from one adventure to another.
Yeah. Candide all over again.
So Barbara and then Susie.
I think this is defensive, but I lived in the Valley exactly at this time. And I must say, this wasn't my experience. I think it was a slice, it was there. But there were many other things about the Valley that weren't depicted in this. And I think that was part of, I mean, it was tongue in cheek and it was funny, but it was also kind of obnoxious. And I thought the obnoxiousness was, I mean, I don't think he looked very clearly at the nuances of what was going on there. It was just one slice. And I think it was a very narrow slice. I thought the Valley was kind of cool then, but I came from Boston and I thought it was great.
Oh my God. Well, it takes all kinds, you know.
I just think it was very narrow understanding of what was going on there. It was going on, but it wasn't the only thing going on. And I don't think he fleshed out, or the film fleshed out
Right.
the
So
depth of what was going on in the 70s. It was one piece of it.
Right. It's you know, I think you're right, Barbara, but my take on it is it was flippant.
So that's
You know, so we saw the same film, but you felt he treated it okay, and you know, let it off without being critical.
No, she
and I felt like it
No, it didn't.
No, she did not.
no.
Barbara, I'm Boston born and Boston bred, and this
too.
movie was not Boston.
That's why she liked it.
Where are you from in Boston? That's what's important.
Absolutely, Malden.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Nice
that's
to
the
meet
other
you.
side
Oh,
of the
that,
track.
it's the valley.
Where
I
are
grew
you
up in-
from?
My grandparents were from Roxbury, of course, and then we
Right.
migrated to Brookline and Newton, and then I migrated to the Valley.
Yeah. And the O for the Malden, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks.
That's it.
But it was
Susie,
still
go
Malden.
ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, Jim, a big compliment to you, because obviously you have taught this group how to be amazing film critics, because you've just nailed it. Everybody, most of the people really are not willing to give this much to say it was a terrific movie. So please don't fail me, because I'm not totally on your page. I think that a movie like this, if you can put aside all the things that Jim has taught us about plots and about consistency and about coming together, if you can put that all aside and look at how cute and fun and zany, the 70s needed that. They just kind of, the times are just so different now.
Right.
It's almost like, God, I wish I had Gary as my brother. I wish that he was somewhere around, running around. I mean, the way he went from the answering the phones to jumping into the water beds, that was just it was
Okay.
unbelievable, unbelievable.
You know, I appreciate that, and thanks for the kind words. But you know, I saw the same thing, and that's why I condemned the 70s, because I felt like we had lost the momentum, the idealistic momentum of the 60s. Where was that? If this could be all consuming to those people's lives, then they weren't being fully lived, and we were falling backwards into, you know, the silence, you know, ignoring Black people and Hispanics and Japanese and Asian, and ignoring the Holocaust and ignoring all those political issues, which were very much there. There was Vietnam, there was Watergate, you know, we were beginning to feel the rumbles of climate change.
But you said take movies for what they are. This movie wasn't about those things.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
I want to read a comment from somebody else who liked it, that they just sent. And it is, I liked it too. They were vignettes. There was no plot. It was Alana and her growth through the various crazy LA things: waterbeds, pinball machines, fascination with rich Hollywood types, disappointment with politicians, driving a truck backwards instead of car chases, just a ton of insane observations based on the director's memories. And
that's a sweet review.
Who said that?
I get it.
one of the participants here who's not on right now, who got up.
Okay. Well, I wish they were on, but
Alona had commented on
I
that.
see. Well, that's, you know, Alona's really sharp, and she often has zingers like that just cut to the point. And I'm trying not to condemn people for liking it. I'm just trying to call Paul Thomas Anderson to task for not making more of it, because he's onto something, but it didn't coalesce into anything.
But don't you always say that you have to take the movie for what it is?
That's true.
That this is, you wanted him to make your movie. He made his movie about a bunch of vignettes about LA in the 70s. And it's the shallowness and the amusing part and the sweetness of growing up in those times.
Okay. Can't argue with that, Fern. Counselor.
All right, Fern.
Anybody else?
Okay, well, I'm glad some people had a good time with this. Stan Davids introduced a really important concept in Torah study this morning. What was the term that he used? Not pre-visualization, but
Preconception,
Pre-understanding.
pre-understanding.
pre-understanding. And it's like a surprise concept in Jewish theology and Jewish psychology is, oh my God, didn't we bring our own expectations to what Judaism is supposed to be? And what does this say about us, and where did that come from? And he very kindly asked me to compare it to movie criticism. And what I didn't say this morning was that, it's very important that films do that for us as well. They make us question our own assumptions and our preconceptions. And there's no end to that kind of examination. So to me, that's like, wrestling with the angel. But also, it's like the better films make us do that more deeply. And when you learn how films are made and how they manipulate you so delicately and in an unseen fashion, then you realize, oh my God, there really is something to this, and I better take it seriously because people thought about this way more than I have. So to the extent that it, and certainly tonight has brought a lot of refreshing opinions and conflicting opinions to us. Fern, I don't mind that you're from the Valley. It's okay.
I'm not from the Valley. I never went to Barbara's from the Valley. I'm from Santa Monica.
So you're otherizing the Valley like I do, huh?
Yes.
Barbara, you were waving? Or was that you were giving me the finger?
I'm from Boston, San Fernando Valley. I mean, so I get a lot of points for both parts.
She's from Venice.
That Gary is the son of Seymour.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, yeah.
Yes, that's his son.
Yeah.
Gary is
actor.
Yeah, how
really
sad that Hoffman, the senior, died young, way too young. He was a brilliant actor.
47.
He was in The Master, which I think is an awful Paul Thomas Anderson movie about a cult-like figure, which is something I'm very sensitive about. And at the same time, he was Truman Capote in
he was brilliant.
He was a brilliant actor, and his loss was terrible for everybody. He just so fine, in every role that he played. And the boy was great.
We're gonna see more of the boy.
I'm sure we will. You can't call him a boy.
I want to read Judy's comment that she tried so hard to get in, please.
Mhm.
Judy said, nobody mentioned the age difference. I don't believe that a woman in her 20s would be involved with a 15-year-old. And I was married to a guy 10 years younger. Till he was older.
Well, at the time that Judy married, the 10 years meant less, but I get her point. It was a problem for me too. But again, Alana didn't look 25. The age difference, she could have been a high school senior,
And she was immature.
What?
And she was immature. That helped.
Well, she was,
immature.
Who knew she was working for the photographer until, later on in that long walking shot? You didn't know who she was.
Student. I thought she was a student.
Right. I did too the first time I saw Susie.
I would have said she was very unsophisticated. And in the 70s, I also thought that, Barbara, please don't take this and don't take this personally, but I thought the Valley was unsophisticated. compared to the other side of the
Right.
hill.
But it was not self-conscious. It did it freely. It didn't realize.
Yes, completely.
It was sincere is one way.
I was not going to let that go.
I mean, I think it was unsophisticated, but not only. And I think it was a very nuanced. I mean, I moved from Boston to the Valley, and then I moved to Venice. But it was a very interesting, wonderful place to raise kids, and wonderful friendships, and I had interesting people that I was involved with. So it was a complicated place. This film made it very, very one note, but it wasn't. That wasn't my experience.
Well, here's a typical Jewish comment from my Jewish mother. When I was 16, I had a date with a guy who was from Panorama City, and it was our first date. Someone introduced us, and I didn't know where he lives. And when he called me on the phone, and he said he lived in Panorama City, and I said it was in the Valley. I said to my mother, "Mom, I'm going out with a guy from Panorama City." She said, "What? Panorama City? Where is that?" I said, "It's the Valley." And she says, "You're gonna go out with somebody from the Valley?" I mean, this was in the late 1950s, like 1959.
So my grandmother was from Odessa, and my grandmother said, "You can marry a Rishasha, maybe a Litvak, but never a Glitziana." She didn't know about any other things.
We do that. We compartmentalize, and maybe this is Paul Thomas Anderson's, love letter to his own past. So it's getting to be the bewitching hour. Unfortunately,
I just want to say one more thing. I talked to my daughter this morning, who was raised in the Valley and watched it. And she's a pretty sophisticated person. She loved the movie.
What did she love about it?
She said it was just about what a lot of the little vignettes had to do with how it was a reminder of what it was like to grow up there, and but I think it was very narrow in its addressing things. I mean, unless you understood what Tale of the Cock was, and it wasn't very interesting. I thought it was very narrow. It didn't explore anything beyond these little vignettes.
Well,
so sorry, Fern.
The Tale of the Cock that Howard read about on restaurants in the 70s was on La Cienega Boulevard, the one that I used to go to with my family. And I have to tell you, you would never have seen Gary saunter in and sit down at the bar and order a Coke. That was really a funny scene. Very cute.
This one was the one on Ventura.
Oh, there was one out there.
One on Ventura.
I guess some of us are just, simple
The
folk.
culture out there.
Shallow, simple folk.
They do things on Ventura that they wouldn't do on San Vicente.
All right, Jim, tell us about when we're meeting again.
Okay, we'll meet in 2 weeks. I don't have a movie selected yet. I'm going to try and do better for you, but I was very busy the last couple of weeks.
Are you feeling guilty?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Well, it's because I care so much that the contortions I went through to program this film, I don't want to share with you, but it's like, is it good enough, for them? I guess I've otherized all of you about what our standards are. You never know, I was thrilled that we all loved Fisherman's Friend, and we acknowledged it was a lot of fun and with people we liked, and there's room for that. I'm not a sourpuss all the time.
Jim, did you see Belfast?
I did. It was shot.
I'm just talking about that as being also an homage in some way to somebody's growing up, a sentimental, growing up, just obviously a deeper.
Didn't have a lot of emotional weight for me.
But you didn't have to live in Belfast to understand the movie.
Right.
Right.
Like you would have to live in the Valley to really understand this one.
To live in the
or in Mea Sherim to understand the black hats in the convertible car, right?
All right.
We can all laugh at ourselves, but we're not quite so easy laughing at somebody else. So I'll let you know by email. I do want to announce that on April 3rd, I'll be giving a Haggadah presentation at the Glazer campus. That's on Vermont in Wilshire. Sunday morning at 9:30. It's on the Schick Haggadah. Arthur Schick was a Jewish artist whose work I've covered in the personal films I've made. And the Schick Haggadah portrayed the ancient Egyptians as Nazis. He even went so far as to put swastikas on their chests, their breastplates, and their armbands. And he had to take them off to get it published, and I'm glad he did. It was published in 1940 in London during the Blitz. And he moved to London from Paris in 1936, I think, or 37, to supervise the printing of it. It's a fine art book. Every page is replete with his calligraphy and his lavish illustrations of the symbols and themes of the Exodus story.
Jim, will it be live streamed?
I think everything, I'll check in on that. That's a good point, Cindy. Thank
Hannah, do you know?
Well, Rabbi Asher is supervising it. Hannah, if you know if that would be live streamed, you can chime in. I'll request that it does. We're also going to have a live display. I do have a fair number of Haggadot that I will bring, including the new edition of the Schick Haggadah, which is a fine art version. You can't handle it, but I will for you and show you the incredible illuminations of the Haggadah story, the Exodus story. And we'll have other Haggadahs there for contrast. The story of the Haggadah, some of you may know this, is a story of the diaspora. Jews took the Haggadah with them wherever they travel in the world, including India and China and South America. And in all of these other versions, we see the incorporation of cultural issues and icons from the local culture. Jews didn't lose their ancestral identity, nor did they deny their current identity as Indians. There's a wonderful illustration in an Indian version where you see women in saris making matzah with their hands. So it's just so rich with all the other cultures of the diaspora. It's really fun to see. So we'll have some examples of that. So there'll be this display of books. And so that's 9:30 on April 3rd, Sunday morning. You can park in the synagogue structure, and all are welcome, including guests. And that's all I have for tonight. Thanks for a really spirited discussion. I'm glad you guys went along with this and didn't throw eggs at me. And some of you even liked it. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.